and welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee. Could I first of all have order of business? Sorry, apologies.
Apologies, Chair, from Mr Smale and from Councillor Milligan.
And the order of business.
The order of business as published. Follow papers have been issued in respect of items 6 and 9, and an additional paper to supplement what had already been issued for item number 7 have been issued.
Thanks, John. And Kenneth, you were looking to introduce our new audit partner.
Yes, we have our new audit partner, Paul Dossett from Grant Thornton, with us today, replacing Gary Devlin. It's Paul's first meeting of the committee.
Thank you very much, Ken. Obviously delighted to be here. Just very briefly, I'll just give the committee a bit of background. I've been working with local government for now nearly 30 years, mainly in England, some work in Wales. So really looking forward to working with you. I think the audit role is very important. I think we have an important role in scrutinising the work of the council and being supportive of the improvements that you're looking to make. And I look forward to working with you over the next 2 years. Thank you.
I'm sure we're all very much looking forward to working with you as well.
Chairman, this is a permanent change. Gary is no longer returning. Could we send him our best wishes and thank him for all what he's done before?
I'm sure we can arrange that, yes. That takes us to declarations of interest. Any members looking to declare? Obviously, if something does come up over the course, please feel free to do so at any point. Which takes us into item 4, the minutes of the meeting of the 9th of December.
Chairman, I'm sorry to come back to this, but it was very helpful to get a transcript of the meeting where we discussed new buyers. I read it carefully, and I maintain that I'm really troubled by this whole situation, because we have received from our advisors confirmation.
I think, sorry, before you go into too much detail, Peter, it was a private item that you're referring to. We're obviously in a public session of the meeting at the moment, and I think, yes, I'm happy to note again your concerns about the content of the debate. But I think we need to be careful about going into the detail of the debate again, given it was a private item. More than happy to again note your concerns, but I think we did have the debate, and the transcript's been made available to all members now. I personally don't see any other issues that came out of that we didn't previously cover. And I think, as I say, more than happy to again note your concerns, but I think I'd be keen to move on from it.
Yeah, I understand that, but I cannot stress strongly enough how I feel we could get very severely unstuck.
Yes, that certainly be noted. Any other items from the minute? Are we happy to agree? Thank you. It takes us then to item 5, the Health and Social Care Integration Report. Eva.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is really to inform the Audit Committee about the very significant changing arrangements for the governance and delivery of health and social care services here in Midlothian, and also to give some consideration to the effect that this will have on audit arrangements. My colleague Tom Welch, who is Integration Manager, will provide a short presentation that will give an overview of the changes. But before I pass on to Tom, I just wanted really to draw the committee's attention to paragraph 2.4 in the report, and in particular for the need to highlight that the new Integrated Joint Board, or as we refer to it as the IGB, will need to ensure that there is adequate and proportionate audit and risk management arrangements in place. It may need its own audit and risk committee. However, it's not anticipated at this stage that it will require its own audit function but instead what we're needing to look at, and indeed we're beginning the dialogue around, is how Council and NHS audit functions will collaborate and cooperate around the delivery of that function. But I'll pass over to my colleague Tom Welch to give an overview, and we'll be happy to respond to questions at the end of that.
Good morning, and thank you. I hope you've all got a copy of this. I circulated it around earlier. I'm aware that many of you will already have been briefed about... I'm aware that many of you will have been briefed about the integration process through council meetings and through briefings of elected members, so I'll romp through this. There's a final slide which begins to look at some of the audit implications. Midlothian Integration Scheme doesn't sound a very exciting title for a presentation, but amongst the officers in health and social care, I think we're seeing this as a really exciting opportunity to develop more locally responsive health and social care services. So going on to the first page, entitled Public Bodies Joint Working, legislation was passed which requires that NHS Lothian and Midlothian Council must delegate health and social care functions to the new body. For the first time, this body will have a single budget for health and social care, and it does represent quite a shift in local control of, particularly of health services. Slide 2, National Health and Wellbeing Outcomes. These are outcomes which are prescribed by Scottish Government, and the new integration bodies will have to deliver against these outcomes. Expectation that people will live in better health, they'll be able to live independently in the community, and that we'll have a mechanism for addressing more effectively health inequalities are some of the outcomes mentioned there. Slide 4, titled Integration Planning Principles. There'll be nothing of surprise there. Looking for services delivered to service users to be integrated, to be responsive to individual needs, and importantly to be more locally responsive. Indeed, we're required to indicate how we're going to plan for localities. I'm going to say a bit more about that later. Basic process is the next slide. The law was approved by Scottish Government in December. It requires that we develop an integration scheme, and you'll have seen that. It's a fairly weighty document. It also requires that we produce a strategic plan, and that will describe how we provide health and social care services over the next 3 years in Midlothian. The strategic plan will be managed through what's called a strategic planning group, and the intention is that there'll be very widespread engagement of all stakeholders, users, carers, providers, staff. The Integration Joint Board itself is in shadow form at the moment and will be established sometime in June, July. Over the page to integration in Midlothian. Basically, across the country, there were two choices. One was to go for a body corporate model. The other was a lead agency model. As far as we know, the only authority in the country that's gone for lead agency is Highland. Everywhere else has gone for the body corporate model.
Could you explain what that means?
It's a body which will be to some extent independent of the parent bodies NHS Lothian and Midlothian Council. The Integration Board will have functions delegated to it and significantly a budget for which it will decide how to meet the needs of people in Midlothian. It will then, as you'll see in bullet point 4, direct back to NHS Lothian and Midlothian Council what services have to be provided. So it's not an operational body, it's a strategic planning body, and a body which will check that the outcomes which I mentioned earlier are being delivered. And on to the next slide, Midlothian Integration Scheme process. The Act itself was approved last April. We've had a whole series of regulations and guidance notes delivered over the past 12 months. The integration scheme itself was approved for consultation by the Council and by Health in December. That's now out for public consultation. We've had something like 70 responses, although not in any great depth. The consultation process ends mid-February, and following any comments that need to be taken account of through consultation and any further guidance from Scottish Government, the integration scheme will be redrafted and further approval will be sought through the Council and through NHS Lothian before it's then submitted to Scottish Government for consideration. The expectation is that Scottish Government will take something in the region of two to 3 months to approve the plans, so we expect sometime in June, July, all being well, to be able to go live. On to Midlothian Integration Scheme slide. The guidance is very specific about what we need to include in the integration scheme, and I'll not go through the details. Significantly, financial management, financial processes has consumed quite a lot of energy over the last 12 months, as has clinical and care governance.
Could you just explain what is IJB?
IJB is the term that we're now required to use to describe the new body. It's the Integration Joint Board. Initially, it was a Health and Social Care Partnership Board, but the legislation describes it as an Integration Joint Board. On to the next slide, what functions must be delegated. What we have to do is delegate all adult social care and all adult community health services and some hospital services. Obviously, I'll not go through the detail. The important shift is in the local responsibility and control for a significant proportion of hospital services, particularly those services which relate to unscheduled care, with the view being that by working together in the community between local health and local social work services, we will be able to reduce significantly the number of people that go into hospital as an emergency. And then finally, integration joint boards do have some flexibility about what further functions might be delegated to it. Midlothian Council is proposing that criminal justice be delegated to the IJB, and NHS Lothian are looking to delegate health services for people under the age of 18, as described there, on the basis that these services are generic services and can't be easily divided into adult and children's services. And then I'll pass over to Evelyn for the slide trying to describe the audit arrangements.
Sorry, before you leave that, when they say they have chosen to delegate, was that in conjunction with discussions with us?
It's described in the consultation integration scheme, which has now gone out for consultation. So in the sense that the consultation integration scheme was considered by Council, yes, it was. But there's still the opportunity for that to be reconsidered.
And what is the view of the officials on that?
I think criminal justice is a complex area because obviously there's a significant element of the service relates to the Safer Communities Board in terms of reducing reoffending. Our concern is to make sure that the factors that can lead to offending, the health and social care needs, mental health, substance misuse, etc., are fully addressed, and therefore we believe there is some value in including criminal justice within the scope of the Integration Joint Board.
Thank you, Tom. The final slide, we've tried to capture some of the complexity of these new arrangements in the final slide. If you look at the clear one that's got the IJB, the Integrated Joint Board, we've tried to capture there the areas that will be of concern to audit in relation to the activities of the Integrated Joint Board. Its primary function is the strategic commissioning of services, laying out a plan that will set out how we will reshape and deliver services locally, both local and for those services that we will engage with our hospital colleagues with in around the delivery as well for our local community. So that's one area. Obviously, the governance arrangements of the board itself, and the decision-making process, and finally, the use of resources, because both the Health Board and the Council will be providing the new board with the resources required to deliver those services. In the next stage of the process, the board will then require both parent bodies, NHS Lothian and the Council, to take operational responsibility for the delivery of the services as they've set out in the strategic commissioning plan. So that's captured in the blue and the green circles. So those services will continue to be operationally managed and delivered by Council and Health Board. Therefore, the existing audit arrangements will apply to those services. But what's also happening is that I, as Joint Director, will have a role in relation to both the Council and the Health Board for the operational management of those services. And what you're seeing is the two circles overlap, and that is where we're bringing together services so that they're integrated in delivery. And as we further develop integration and make it happen on the ground, then those two circles will move together and overlap more as we have joint teams delivering services. At the moment, our district nursing service and our home care service, for example, are managed quite separately. As we go forward, we'll be making arrangements for more integrated delivery. And it's the same examples of services that we've already integrated, and that's why those circles are overlapping, are our rapid response teams. That's a service that provides both hospital at home, emergency response, emergency home care, and they're both currently under one operational manager. So that's an example of a service that we've already integrated. As we continue in this journey, we'll move those two circles closer together, and we'll have more overlap. In terms of, there's also, it's very clear from the legislation that while the IGB has responsibility for strategic commissioning, it also has responsibility for the delivery of outcomes. So that requires it not just to hand over the requirements to the parent bodies for the delivery of service, but it must also maintain some operational oversight. It must assure itself that those two bodies are actually delivering and will fulfil the ambitions of the IGB in terms of delivering the outcomes. So we're starting to see that the IGB will also have a role in relation to the performance management and the operational oversight of those services. I'm conscious that what I'm trying to describe, it's certainly in my head, it feels complex. And for those of us that have been very closely involved, it's taken some time, and it's exercised a lot of time in terms of discussion within the parent bodies, particularly within NHS Lothian, where it involves a very significant shift in delivery and governance arrangements. But I think what's key is the IGB will, once it's established, need to have clarity around how it manages audit and risk in relation to the strategic commissioning, its own governance and its use of resources in developing the commissioning plan. But much of the audit functions in the two parent bodies will have continuing responsibility around the operational delivery, and as we go forward they will be required to increasingly work together and there will be much overlap in their activities. I'll pause for any questions or clarification.
Thanks, Evelyn and Tom. Before I come to Ian, could I maybe just get a quick view from internal audit on the process of designing the oversight that we need?
Basically, we have arranged a meeting with NHS audit team in February, and I think we're going to, at that stage, discuss the way that we would see this best operating. And I think the plan is, once we've had that meeting, we'll bring a report back to this audit committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious that the services that we provide here are very largely demand-led. I'm quite interested on how the budget is going to be managed, particularly if it overspends, but also the democratic accountability side to it, if you like. Who decides what Midlothian Council's contribution to that budget is going to be? What happens if it does overspend? What sort of scrutiny will there be at Audit Committee, Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee, for example? I believe that there isn't a democratically elected health board, as I think there was in Dumfries and Galloway. I don't know if it's still operating, and there was a move towards that, but I don't know what's happened with that. So I'm just conscious that we need to have elected representatives, either on the health board or on the council, who can scrutinise what's happening and feed into the budgetary process.
Am I right in saying there's 4 elected members on the Integrated Joint Board from Midlothian Council? So,
yes, just to confirm that, there are 4 elected members on the Shadow Board at the moment, and there will also be 4 elected members on the IJB. There's also, and they have voting rights. There's also from NHS, there are 4, and it's a combination of executive and non-executive members from NHS. So it's 4 and 4. And in relation, and they, when they sit on that board, it's a body corporate, and their responsibility is really in relation to the delivery of services. You know, they're sitting there as members of that board first and foremost.
Could we hear who are these 4 members?
Councillor Kath Johnson, Councillor Bob Constable, Councillor Derek Milligan and Councillor Brian Pottinger are the 4 members. In relation to the chairing of the board, and again this is all laid out in the integration scheme, the chairing will rotate for, it's a fixed period, so it's anticipated, because NHS Lothian has held the chair during the shadow period, that once the board goes live, the chair will move to a council member. So a council member will be responsible for the chairing of the board for the first 3 years, and then it will rotate to one of the NHS Lothian nominated members. Those eight members will have voting rights, and although other individuals will sit on the board, such as carer representatives and service user representative, it is only the elected members and the nominees from NHS Lothian who will have voting rights on the board. In terms of the financial arrangements, and my colleague Gary will comment on this as well, but what's very clear in the legislation is, and the guidance, is that we must go through a process of due diligence in relation to assuring ourselves that the resources that are allocated to the board are adequate to deliver the functions required. And that involves, and the work's already underway, and there's been reports to the Shadow Board on this. It involves scrutiny of spending patterns over the last 3 years, so that we're able to identify the risks and examine those risks. It is up to the 2 parent bodies to set, within those constraints of needing to go through a process of due diligence, it's up to the 2 parent bodies to set out the amount of resources that will be made available to the board. There's a section in the integration scheme, a proposed section around finance, but at the end, I mean, the members can read the detail in there, but there will be a continuing, if there's an over or an underspend, it will require both parent bodies to come together to examine that and to make a decision in accordance with what the pattern of spend is. In terms of demand-led budgets and concerns about over and underspends, in my responsibility as the Director of Operational Activity, I will have a continuing responsibility around matching resources to assessed needs, and that will continue. I've mentioned about that bit of an overlap, that the IGB also must have a responsibility in relation to how it's called operational oversight. So the IGB will have operational oversight of performance, and we have as yet to work out the detail of how that will be discharged, because we've only very recently, it's an area that there's been a lot of discussion about, and it's only in recent weeks that we've started to get some guidance from Scottish Government. So how that will interplay with the Council's performance and scrutiny arrangements, we haven't set out clearly yet, but we will do so in the coming weeks. Gary, do you want to comment further on the arrangements in relation to finance?
Yeah, just very briefly, I suppose, in terms of its strategic role, the board is a separate entity to all intents and purposes, will have its own Chief Financial Officer, and there's an interim appointment to that post at present. So they will advise the board, so there is that independence. In simple terms, there are broadly 4 financial transactions for the board. It will receive a transfer of resources notionally from the local authority and the health board. It will then, through the strategic plan, determine how much of those resources go back to each of the 2 parent bodies to deliver the operational services under Eblin's remit. Those resources will cover services that are currently provided in adult social care within the local authority, within what was the community health partnership in terms of the local health services, and also a notional sum for acute. And the whole emphasis of the direction of travel for the IJB is to shift those resources, to make to join them up, to integrate, and to make maximum use. Without that, then the funding pressures that come with demographics on acute services would be unsustainable. There's a lot of work going on. The strategic plan, together with the integration scheme, will set out how we go about determining the budgets that will go in, how the 2 parent bodies and the integrated board agree that those are sufficient for what has been asked to do, and also will set out the method of allocating the resources back to the operational partners. It will also need to set out what happens when there are variations from what was planned, how the partners contribute, how the risks are shared within the parent bodies, and equally how the risks are shared across Lothian. So if we take one area, for example, prescription, significant cost in terms of the overall Lothian health budget managed at a Lothian level. As that budget transfers into the partnership, the responsibility of the partnership and the risk sharing across Lothian still needs to be bottomed out. There's a lot of detail still to be worked through to make it work, and to make sure that the mechanisms support the overall objectives of the whole health and social care integration agenda. And we'll bring back further reports to Council and through Audit Committee and the board itself in terms of the progress that's been made. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks. Yeah, I think most of my questions were answered. If I can specifically ask, for example, take an example, telecare charges, which was something which was quite controversial, I think, amongst Council when decisions have been taken to change those charges. How would that operate if we decided, or you as the joint board decided you wanted to increase telecare charges. Where would the democratic accountability lie with that?
Charging will remain the responsibility of the council.
Sorry, on page 9 here, what functions must be delegated? Maybe I've misread this. Telecare is included within social work functions. Is that not one of the items which would be...
Absolutely. The delivery of telecare services will be the responsibility of the planning for the delivery of the services will be the responsibility of the IGB. But it's up to the council to determine how it acquires the resources to deliver services. So, in other words, the council needs to provide the IJB with resources to deliver the strategic plan, and the council may or may not choose to use its capacity to charge for services to acquire those resources. So the council in itself, it's the IJB who will determine how telecare services are delivered within the constraints of the resources it receives from council. The council will determine whether or not it will receive income by charging for those resources.
I'm very confused by this. Obviously, it's demand-led, as I say. It's going to be very, very difficult to judge what exactly the budget's going to be. You can have a good idea and you can try and manage that. What's to stop the council taking in a lot more extra money by just increasing telecare charges significantly, other charges as well, and saying to the joint board, well, here's your money, you get on with it, we'll take this extra money for ourselves?
I think the bottom line is nothing. There's nothing to stop the council doing that if that was what the council chose to do.
There are representatives of the council on the IJB who will have responsibilities within that corporate, as members of the board of that corporate body, to ensure that the strategic commissioning plan is delivered. So I guess at the end of the day it'll be how elected members discharge their duties in both arenas.
I was glad you mentioned outcomes and performance management towards the end of the presentation there, because I think that's obviously, while it's important that we have audit over commissioning, governance and use of resources, I think we do need to have sight on the outcomes that are achieved and performance management. So obviously I take it the report that's going to be coming back to us will tie together the internal audit functions and some of these other scrutiny arrangements that need to be made to be finalised for the formal launch, I suppose, of the joint board.
Yes, there will be further reports, and there is continuing work nationally on this area, and I guess for us the challenge is, while the council and the health board will have continuing responsibility in relation to operational delivery, as highlighted by Councillor Baxter's very relevant question, what we need to ensure is that council and health board are working together in relation to the IJB. So we may need to look at council and health coming together to consider how they review performance of operational activity.
We've got the two recommendations on page 4 of the report, also noting the forthcoming establishment of the partnership, and that further reports will be presented to look at more detail on the internal audit functions. Are we happy to accept these recommendations? Thank you. That then takes us on to item 6, which is the risk management update for 1st October to 31st December.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide Audit Committee with the 2014-15 Q3 update on risk management. The report focuses on two areas, corporate risk and service risks, which are currently graded as critical or high risk. For corporate risk, We have seen some movement in the risk profile since the start of 2014-15, and this is shown in the table under section 2.2. Corporate risks currently graded as critical or high risk are corporate change and transition, balancing budgets in future years, and Welfare Reform Act. Under service risks, we have critical and high service risks, and these are listed under 2.7 with detailed information provided as Appendix 2. For noting for Audit Committee, the Corporate Risk Management Group has reconvened with new services providing service managers to attend this group. The group's initial focus has been on ensuring that service registers are updated, and work has been undertaken to realign service risk registers with the new organisational structure. Revised risk rating model will shortly be applied to the covalent system and will impact on future risk management reporting, and this will reflect the risk rating schedule set out in the risk management policy. This will be applied during Q4. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. How do you see the update? Do you see a major impact on the reporting from the changes?
The changes that will take place, I think the risk rating schedule will become more straightforward for everyone to understand. I think there's some particular nuances and complexities to the previous risk rating schedule. I think the process of realigning the organisation's risk registers to the new structure makes it clear where risks are currently sitting within the organisation, and there's now a need for some further refocused work to ensure that the risk registers that we have in place accurately reflect the true risk exposure of the Council.
Members, any questions?
There's quite a lot in this report. If I could ask a question on page F16 of the... If I could ask Kevin the answer to the actions, follow-up data cleansing to be completed over the rent council tax and sundry debtor system. I just wonder where we are with that. Put you on the spot, Kevin.
Unless I don't know. Kevin or Chris?
Sorry, I don't have the same numbered papers as Councillor Bryant. I'm looking for that in the table.
The risk and code title said CSE 01-19.
Thank you. And that was in relation to the risk of our income collection. We've improved in-year collection on council tax. We're up 0.5 from where we were at this point last year, and we're up 0.2 on rent income collection from this point last year. So certainly we're continuing to take robust measures in terms of recovery process and improving the systems, which are also taking account of changes from legislation, particularly in terms of universal credit in respect of welfare reform, and the testing for those systems are currently ongoing.
Just not completed yet, is that what you're saying, Kevin?
Not completed yet, no. But we're working with the system providers in respect of that, so we can complete those risks, which were also picked up in terms of other internal audit reports for billing and collection.
Thanks very much.
Chairman, while I got the audit papers last week, the follow-up papers I only got this morning. I wasn't in the office yesterday. They weren't available. They came when I first went to the same meeting as you went. But to have so little time to look at such a basic paper as number 6, and for that matter number 9, I really feel is not the way that things should go. And I really would like to ask officials if they could get papers to us before the weekend, because it's really quite a lot of reading to do.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's important for members' proper consideration of the papers in front of them, that they have due time to give them that consideration. So I do apologise if papers were only available at such very short notice.
I specifically got the audit papers on Monday when we had a meeting, and the follow-up papers were not available. I spent last night looking at the audit papers, but this morning, with other meetings, I couldn't really give enough time to the items number 6 and number 9, and I really disliked that. Thank you for making sure that doesn't happen again.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question. I'm just wondering what the red octagon in column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is, because it doesn't look good. It's on just about every row, I think.
In relation to the service risks, the service risks that are reported to Audit Committee are the critical and high risks, and that red octagon indicates that it's a critical or high risk. I will make sure that correlation is clearly set out in new information that's presented.
At this stage, members happy to note the update report. Thank you. That then takes us to item 7, which is a National Fraud Initiative update. Kathleen.
Thank you, Chair. It's to provide the Audit Committee with an update on the 2012-13 exercise, also a bit of an update on the council tax to electoral roll matches, and some information in relation to the NFI planning and resourcing for 14-15. An update was brought last year to the Audit Committee that gave an interim update on the results of the 2012-13 exercise. The report and its contents with the appendix attached provide now a final update for the 2012-13 exercise. We also carried out a council tax to an electoral roll match in the summer of last year. Subsequent to that, we were notified that we could also carry out an additional match with the updated electoral roll as a result of the surge in people registering to vote on the Scottish independence referendum. So as a result of that, we're carrying out an additional match to our council tax records to identify any fraud and error in benefits or discounts. That hasn't taken place yet, but that's planned. The matches in terms of the 14-15 exercise have only been received last week and weren't received in time to update this report. There are resource implications for the services who receive the matches, and they're detailed in the report, and we've had consultation with those who will take place in carrying out the checking of those matches. The 12-13 table in the report confirms the numbers of matches and the outcomes of that. The Appendix 1, as I say, goes into a bit more detail of the results of that. That details some significant overpayments identified, and equally so some cases that are now being referred to the Procurator Fiscal for consideration of criminal proceedings. The electoral roll and council tax matches are also nearly complete, that give an indication of the number that are still under investigation presently, and also the updated electoral roll match that we'll be carrying out further data matching on. The intention is to note the contents of the report, and that once the checking of the 14-15 exercise is underway, further update reports will come back to Audit Committee to provide updates on that.
Certainly, I mean, it's encouraging, I suppose, that such a high proportion are cleared with no issue after the initial match, but it does, the number that's jumping out in benefit fraud, housing tax, council tax reduction cases, is that higher than it's been in the past, or is that kind of in line with where we've seen it before?
It was in line where we've seen it in the past. There's not a massive increase or decrease. It's probably in line where we've seen it before.
Just a small thing at the bottom of page 14, the table there, electoral roll and council tax matches,
with the third line, I don't understand. Number of matches received 187, cleared no issue 187, but there's still 187 under investigation. Is that how? Why is that?
Sorry, I think that's just a typo. The 187, they've not been cleared. The 187 haven't been cleared. These are cases where people will be turning 18 in this year, so they've still to be looked at. Apologies.
Also, Chair, the totals in the first table there, the second column doesn't seem to add up to 1668, and the last one, 428, doesn't equal 454.
Yes, apologies on that, sorry.
Obviously, there's still a bit of work ongoing. Do we get a final report after the conclusion of the works that are still outstanding?
The 12-13 report, the annual report, has already been issued by Audit Scotland, so the 14-15 result matches have only just been received, so it will be a further year before the annual report will be provided on that. Updates will be provided on our local matches, though.
Members satisfied? Okay, thank you. Takes us then to item 8, which is the annual audit report to members from Grant Thornton.
This is our annual audit report, so it presents our findings from the 2013-14 audit process, which includes our findings on the financial statements, governance and performance. Normally known for quietness. This report has also already been to the December council meeting, but there are a few areas that I would highlight just in introduction, and particularly, I guess, in relation to finance. So just as a bit of background, this time last year, we and the other scrutiny bodies who are represented on the Council's local area network identified a number of areas for additional scrutiny at the Council, particularly relating to interlinked areas like financial management and efficiency, so really about the progress of the business transformation programme. So this audit report incorporates a best value follow-up review that we undertook really on behalf of Audit Scotland. And I think it's fair to say within the findings that we identified quite good progress against a number of areas, so including the development of the single Midlothian plan and actually delivering against some of the outcomes within the single outcome agreement. We also noted that throughout 2014, significant progress has been made in terms of the approval of the financial strategy, really to start addressing the budget shortfall in the medium term. And we found that there was a lot more rigour around validating and monitoring the savings from the business transformation programme. But, and I guess one of our key messages is that the outlook remains challenging. So at the time that the report was issued, there was still a budget gap of about £7 million to be addressed by 2017-18, although I understand that that's now around about just under £6 million. But difficult decisions lie ahead, and we use this report really to echo what Audit Scotland said in their overview report around about the importance of scrutiny. So I guess one of the things we noticed was that the single Midlothian plan sets out a really ambitious programme for Midlothian, particularly on economic growth. And scrutiny should really be able to provide that kind of check and balance and make sure that the resources are targeted in the right way. Within the audit action plan at the back of the report, we make a number of recommendations around improving the quality of performance and financial reporting to members, really to help improve that scrutiny role. I'll talk at the next point about our kind of planning process for this year's audit, but happy to take any questions on the actual report now.
Thank you, Chair. My apologies, I've asked this in the past and I can't remember what the answer is. Page 33, where it's the second paragraph, it says the Council used the Capital Fund to make principal loan payments totalling £2.5 million. I'm just wondering the circumstances under which this is allowed. Now, I seem to remember once being told that there are specific exceptions I think once we were allowed to use it for the equal pay claims, for example. I think that's the only instance that I recall where I've been told where we can do it. Can you remind me what the reasons are that we can use this procedure?
Chair, perhaps a better place to answer that question. There are two legislative ways that resources that we've put into a capital fund can be used. One, to defray capital expenditure that's incurred, or two, to meet debt repayments on capital expenditure incurred in previous years. The consequences of the second action, because we'll have budgeted in the revenue budget for the debt repayments, is it effectively enhances the general fund reserve and helps that offset one-off costs, and that's what that transfer in question that you're referring to effectively did. It strengthened their general fund balance at a time of significant financial constraint.
But surely that allows us to transfer quite a substantial amount of money, given the figures, to essentially just put off paying off our debts indefinitely.
We're not putting off paying the debts, so the repayment, if you like, the principal on the mortgage, for simplification, that services have incurred and need to repay to fund the investment in assets, is still being repaid. Instead of it coming from the council tax and Scottish Government grant income that's coming in during the year, we are, in all intents and purposes, using receipts from the sale of assets to pay that. That's a mechanism that how the money moves around.
No, I'm confused. You'd probably have to give me an example. Say we owe £100 million in capital, and you're saying that if we sold a building that we no longer need, we can put that money into revenue.
So we've got £100 million of debt outstanding on our assets, for example, schools. £1 million of that is due to be repaid to the loans fund in the year as the mortgage repayment.
So, sorry, that's not any of the capital. That's just servicing the capital, you're saying?
It's repaying the capital, so we would repay over the life of the asset, just as you would repay your mortgage over the time you're living in the house. So we normally fund that £1 million through our revenue budget, i.e. funded from council tax, income, Scottish Government grant. Just as you would pay your mortgage from your wages. What we're doing here is we're saying, well, we sold this other piece of land, we've got a pile of money for it, we're going to use that to meet the debt repayment. So, you know, it might be a bit like using a legacy or a other windfall income to repay your mortgage, and take the money that you would have been saved, you would have paid from your earnings to pay it off, and use that for something else. And in this case, the net effect of all of that is that we end up transferring the money over, and it increases our general fund balance rather than capital fund. So it's moving capital receipts income into revenue reserves.
Right, so to get this straight, that piece of land was on our asset books, on our books as an asset, capital asset, if you like. Now, when we sell that should remain within the capital part of our accounts. So that should go towards paying off some of the debt. So, but you're saying that we can actually transfer that to revenue. So essentially, whenever we sell any of our property, apart from council housing, that's different, we can put that straight into our revenue account rather than capital.
Not straight in, but there are mechanisms, as I've said earlier, to put where you can take capital resources and move them across to the revenue account by the repayment of debt through that mechanism.
Right, so sorry to labour the point, but let's say we had a council which decided to buy some assets and then borrowed legitimately on our capital accounts for that, and then we sold that. Then, to my mind, you could then, by a process of buying and selling, transfer, use your capital borrowing to fund your revenue account.
There are restrictions on how much you can transfer, so the maximum you can transfer would be equal to no more than your debt repayment in the year. So if you kept borrowing lots of money to buy assets and then sold them, you would still get into a rather sticky position. So it wouldn't be a course of action that I would recommend, and I'm sure colleagues in Grant Thornton would not support in terms of their scrutiny of the Treasury strategy.
Maybe, Owen, you shouldn't have been here to listen to that.
Grace, if I could, on page 20, after you finished your statement, you said you've noted a number of areas where reporting to the committee can be improved. And then your last sentence says, there continues to be scope to improve the quality of financial reporting through financial statements. Could you just tell me what that actually means?
Yep. We've had an agenda, I guess, for a number of years around about the quality of financial reporting to the public. So, and I guess that the financial statements are the main mechanism for doing that. So within the report, we comment on the quality of the explanatory foreword. Really, I guess, in terms of setting out what the money's been used for and what the spend has been. So I guess much in the same way as the council would report at the start of the year in the budget about how you're going to spend the money, actually about how you have spent that money. There are also, I'll come on to it later, but there are also new regulations. The 1985 regulations are being updated, which will include a management commentary. So there will be kind of push to make that much more of a kind of explanation about what's happened to the money during the year. But it's something that we will work with the finance team on in February and March. We're doing 2 specific training sessions around about technical accounts and about improving the quality of the accounts.
Thank you.
Obviously, we did have this report at the full council in December and had a good go at it at that point, but it's certainly always worth reinforcing that we do recognise the challenge that is there and the need to keep up the pace of addressing the shortfall we have. I think it's useful that the report acknowledges financial strategy, it highlights this and shows a clear direction of travel, but I don't think we can ever get away from the fact that this grouping needs to keep a very close eye to ensure that where targets have been set, they're met. And obviously, as the performance framework is updated, that then lends itself hopefully to be a bit more user-friendly and accessible to more. Ian?
Yeah, just very briefly. It's just a comment, really, that under recommendations 6 and 7, I noticed that the auditors show at least a little concern that about the transparency of reporting to the council. I have mentioned to the member development team that certainly myself and a number of other councillors have in the past expressed concern that we don't fully understand how council accounts are laid out. I'm a qualified bookkeeper. This councillor here has a lifetime of finance, and yet we don't understand it. And to my mind, it's a bit like a board of directors who don't understand the company accounts, and that's serious. So I have mentioned that, and they have promised to include seminars and training sessions to help us to understand the accounts better, and I'm grateful that that's happening.
With that, we note the report. Thank you. Which takes us then to item 9, which is the Audit Committee update.
Yep. This is essentially an information paper for this committee. I thought it would be a good opportunity just to kind of talk about our audit planning process, but you have stolen a little bit of my thunder around about scrutiny and how we can help, because quite a large section of this report summarises reports both from Audit Scotland and from our national work. Very much, I guess, to highlight that you're not alone in scrutinising performance or in dealing with some of the particularly financial challenges that you're facing just now. And we use case studies throughout this report to kind of highlight how other councils work. So I guess that really what I'd like this committee to take is that you can get more information and presentations both from us and from Audit Scotland on any of these national reports if you wish them. The other thing I was just going to talk about is really our audit planning process. Our audit plan will be presented to the next audit committee in March, but I guess that so far we've had our shared risk assessment process with the rest of the land partners. So that's all the scrutiny partners coming together to decide on the risks facing Midlothian. But we're also undertaking our usual annual consideration of financial and other risks facing the council, like the integration of health and social care and the impact of issues like new buyers. So those will feed into our annual plan, which we'll talk about next time. We also highlight at the very end of the report some of the key accounting changes that the finance team are facing, and that again we'll be covering within our technical training sessions with the finance team. Happy for any comments or questions on that?
Alex, happy to note. I think it's always useful to have it pulled together in a format that is easily accessible in this way. Happy to note the report. Thank you. That then takes us to item 10, Treasury Management and Investment Strategy 2015-16 and Prudential Indicators.
Thanks, Chair. We've taken the opportunity to bring to Audit Committee today the draft Treasury Management Strategy report, which will be presented to Council when it meets on the 17th of February. So it's coming in advance of Council to allow Audit Committee to be able to gain a better understanding of a critical part of our financial business and to scrutinise and challenge that business. As Chair sets out, the report which will go to Council will seek Council's agreement on our Treasury Management annual investment strategies and also the prudential indicators that give an overview of where we are in terms of our borrowing and affordability of borrowing. The detailed report points to highlight, it sets out what our capital financing requirement is. That's the need that the Council has to borrow, and that's to borrow to fund a significant investment in assets. So as members are aware through the capital plan that was approved last in December, you have continue to have an ambitious capital investment programme, whether it's in schools, whether it's in housing, etc. And we're borrowing the funds to fund that capital investment. The table set out in the report highlights the growth, the movement in debt and where that arises across general services and HRA, and how we'll finance that through capital receipts, capital grants, developer contributions, with a balance then falling on borrowing. In terms of our borrowing strategy at the moment, we sit with an under-borrowed position, i.e. we're using our cash reserves to fund long-term borrowing, and that remains an appropriate approach. Currently, long-term borrowing rates remain low, and to fund our cash reserves, to place those and gain a reasonable rate of return balanced against risk is challenging, and therefore it's prudent to use those cash reserves to delay longer term borrowing. And we continually to monitor that position to make sure that we can go into the market and borrow from PWLB as required. We're not expecting any significant change in 15-16 so far. We continue to borrow short term, and we'll continue to use our cash reserves to offset longer term borrowing requirements. We've made some changes to the investment strategy and instruments. A couple of reasons there, one of which is Council agreed that they would invest in the new battle project, and we've changed the policy, the strategy to allow that in terms of permitted investments, and we've also maintaining the limits in terms of counterparties, etc., that we can invest our cash reserves in. The prudential indicators will be presented to Council alongside the final budget for 15-16 as required by the Prudential Code, and those give, they really demonstrate to members the affordability of the capital plans that we have in terms of our revenue streams to fund the debt, particularly around the housing revenue account, where the investment in new build is funded by and sustained by the rent strategy that Council's approved. There's a lot of detail in the report. The final draft of the report will come to Council on the 17th, but I'm happy to take any questions that members may have on the detail, or indeed picking up on Councillor Baxter's point, I'm happy to meet one-to-one or with groups to go through the detail if that would help members.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gary. Just a couple of questions, really, on page 46, and in the past I've expressed my confusion over the last line of that table, and I'm grateful that you've given a bit more detail underneath this time, and I think I understand it, but there's a couple of terms that I don't understand. Can you explain what cash backing means, and also in the penultimate paragraph, counterparty risk? And also, just clarification on the following page, on page 47, the second paragraph. I take that to understand that we have loans maturing in 2.5 to 6 years, and we're entering into agreements now whereby we can take those loans out when the current ones mature, if you like. And if so, if that is my understanding is correct, can I ask what the interest rates look like compared to the ones that we currently have?
So cash backing reserves, we've got significant reserves. In terms of the General Fund HRA, cash backing would mean that we would de-risk those. We would effectively invest those cash reserves externally. It isn't appropriate to do that at the moment, as I've touched on, because the rate we would get would be very small. You're talking about base rate at 0.5%. To cash back it, we would then enter into long-term borrowing for our borrowing requirement, and we'd be paying rates of 3 or 4%. So it makes sense to keep the money in-house. So that covers the cash back. And
just to come in there, is that the same then in the first bullet point, where in 2013-14 utilise the council's internal cash balances to offset external borrowing? Is that the same?
Correct, thing? Absolutely right. The other aspect of investing our reserves is the counterparty risk. We have, through the policy, focused on investment within government-backed banks, and we engage with Capita through what was the sector Treasury Management Service to secure expert advice and guidance in terms of counterparty risk, to make sure where we're putting our cash reserves are as safe and secure as they can be, and we balance the risk against the return that we receive. The challenge we have is that we know we've got a significant capital investment requirement over the medium term. We've looked at opportunities to tap into cost-effective borrowing rates at the moment. So Public Works Loan Board borrowing from the Treasury are at really all-time lows. We can't go into that market at the moment because while we would access the low cost of borrowing, we would then have we would have to take the cash now, and we would have nowhere to put it. We're working through the Treasury advisors to look at opportunities with financial institutions to effectively forward book money. There is a complex formula within the deal that sets out what the rates are related to the current gilt yields. Effectively, we've got a choice. We can wait and borrow at the point we need to. The market medium-term expectations are that PWLB rates will rise. We can de-risk some of that position by booking into these forward deals. And our projections are that we'd lock into rates that would be lower than PWLB rates are expected to be. Now, in any forward deal, and there is a risk in there, but it's to de-risk as much as possible the overall portfolio.
Gary, did I hear you say we have ample reserves?
Yep, we'll see a report coming to Council on the 17th of February. It will set out the reserves. So, for example, General Fund Reserve will be in the region of £11 million, HRA £20 million. And these are figures that have been reported to Council back in December and regularly. And they reflect where we are in terms of our financial plans.
I accept that, and I recall that clearly. But why are we having here financed by reserves? That is the way that you're financing all the funding. But where do we show on this graph reserves? On this table on page 2, page 46.
Yeah, so what that shows on the table there is £6 million of reserves being utilised to fund capital expenditure. For members' benefit, what we agreed as part of the new battle project is that we would use capital receipts from the capital fund to offset part of the cost of that project. That was a decision I think Council perhaps made in June 2014. So that's a specific utilisation of the capital fund towards the New Battle High School replacement project.
So the 11 million that we have in reserves will be cut back by 6 million to 5 million.
In terms of the resources we've got in the capital fund at the moment, yes, we'll see a transfer out of £6 million, just as you say.
But in that case, we don't have ample reserves.
That only looks at £6 million from the capital fund. It doesn't impact on the £21 million of reserves in HRA, nor the £11 million in general fund. It's the capital fund. I don't have the exact capital fund reserve figure in my head at the moment, but I can happily update you on that detail before Council on the 17th.
There'll be much more detail around the reserves in the report that will come to Council on the 17th. Gary, I wanted to pick up, you're talking about borrowing in advance, and obviously that potentially carries risks with it. I assume it's not the same person who develops a case of why we would need to borrow advance that then checks off why we're doing it. I take it we've got checks and balances in there to make sure that it's independently overseen.
So what we've got through the strategy you've got in front of you today, the strategy that goes to Council would approve the forward funding limits, the borrowing limits. Within the finance team, the senior accountant who is responsible for the Treasury would prepare that business case, and that will then come to my colleague David Gladwin, Financial Services Manager, or myself to approve. So we have that segregation of duties in terms of the process.
And my other point I wanted to pick up was I noticed the permitted investments have expanded. There's more in there, and I accept, and we've had the discussion at Council about the SPV for the new battle, but there's other items in there that haven't been before. Why has that been expanded? Because I thought we tended to be sort of fairly restrictive in the permitted investments that we had.
Yeah, so the biggest change is the subordinate debt subscription and New Battle SPV for the school. What we're continually doing is looking at how we can balance the return and the risk associated with where we put our cash reserves. And we've brought forward, I suppose what the market's doing is looking at opportunities to do that. And it's against the backdrop of, the absolute de-risk position would be to put the reserves into the debt management office, the Treasury, and you would get a return which is less than base rate, less than 0.5%. So we're looking at other means to secure a reasonable return on those investments, but without additional risk, and to spread the investment portfolio as best we can.
I assume these are all incorporated into the risk management profile.
There's a set of risks sitting around Treasury, all of its own. And again, anything we're doing there, any appraisal we'll do in a lot of detail, and we'll link in with our Treasury advisors in terms of what we're doing there to make sure that we are comfortable with the approach that we're taking.
Any other questions from colleagues? We've recommendation is to Council. Are we just noting at the moment or referring it to Council? Because the recommendations are Council recommendations as opposed to committee, or am I? Just a note. Happy to note. Thank you. Which then takes us to item 11, the financial monitoring. Gary.
Yeah, we've brought today the second quarter's financial monitoring report that members saw at Council in December. And again, it's really just to give Audit Committee the opportunity to scrutinise that in further detail and to ask officers questions of the financial performance. So the report sets out where we were at quarter two. We will see the third quarter's report coming to Council on the 17th of February, and that report has just been finalised today. It will show an improvement against the position that we'd previously reported. The report sets out where the financial pressures are that we've identified during the year and gives a trail back, first quarter, second quarter. Page 2 of the report sets out the movement in the general fund balance during the year. The first appendix just gives you a service by service overview of the variations and also the apologies, I'm just the further appendix will give the detail by detail breakdown of the material variances and also information on the performance on the housing revenue account, which also came to Council in December. Happy to pause there and take any questions on the detail asked for our colleagues in terms of their various services.
Clearly we did have a fair discussion on this at the December Council and all members were present. Have we got any other questions on this at this point? Happy to note. That then takes us